Hello, sisters and brothers. You ever thought, we Christians are weird? We're weird. We're strange. We got strange ideas. I think we don't give enough credit to that. That sometimes we can think that being a Christian is kind of like wearing a certain kind of hat. You know, some people might choose a different hat, and we've chosen this one, right? Like, there are many different ways of living, and they're all pretty much the same, just different strokes for different folks. But when we think about it, we're weird. In fact, we seem to be at odds with much of what the world has to say. And when we really dive deep into what we're saying and what we're celebrating in this Easter time, it seems otherworldly, almost impossible for people to understand. Let's consider some of the things that we say as Christians. We say that if you want to have life, you must lose your life. If you want to be happy, give your things away. You want to be good, follow the will of God, not your own. We say all kinds of strange things, don't we? You know, Jesus today is in the midst of these disciples, and they are hidden away out of fear. And why wouldn't they be? It's entirely natural. It would be crazy if they weren't afraid. They just saw their leader and their teacher killed. And they know that the same fate could happen to them. Of course they're scared. And Jesus comes to them, and what does he say? Peace be with you. Peace? Really? How can this be peaceful? And not only that, but now he's saying, leave this locked room. Go out into the world. Make yourself visible. Tell everyone that you are a follower of me. Not just the people in Jerusalem, but even those lands that you haven't even heard of yet. Go there. Peaceful? Doesn't sound very peaceful, does it? So how are we to understand this? You know, as a Franciscan, we have a very famous story that St. Francis told to make a point, and we kind of use it a lot. And I'll tell you, one day, a young brother was asking Brother Francis, how do I achieve perfect joy? How do I find perfect joy? And Francis looked intently at him, and he shared with him a story. He said, suppose you and I had been on the road for many weeks, and we're hungry and we're tired. And we finally get to our destination, and it's the dark of night, and it's raining, and it's cold, and we're worn by the weather, and we're finally gladdened to be home. And so we go to the door, and we knock on the door. No answer. So we bang on the door a little louder. Finally, there's an answer, but they don't open the door. They say, who is it? And it's your brother Franciscans. And you say, it's me, it's Brother Francis. They open the door, they look. I don't know you. Slams the door and tells you to go away. And then Francis looks at this young novice and he says, if in that moment I can praise God and tell him I love him, that is perfect joy. We're weird people, aren't we? What does it mean? How are we to understand this? And the best sense that I can make of it is this. is that we as Christians have seen something and we have experienced something that we once had but was lost. And it is the simple fact that we have a God who made us to love him, and that we are perfected, that we are really ourselves when we stand before him, not just to ourselves. The world looks as freedom as being able to follow your own designs, follow your own desires, right? That freedom is getting rid of all of the chains of civilization, religion, philosophies. That you're really free when you do what you want. Right? Isn't that the way that most people think? That I live for myself. It's an interesting thing. Most people say that they want to be good people, right? You don't meet too many people that say they want to be bad people. We want to be good. And there's this strange idea that exists in the minds of people that we can both be good and do whatever we want. This idea that somehow by just following our own desires and putting ourselves above everything else, that somehow things will just magically work out. That peace will come when everybody is doing their own thing. Now, how much sense does that actually make if you stop to think about it? Let's think about it. If it were that easy, wouldn't we already be at peace? Wouldn't the world already be good? Because isn't that what people have been doing all this time? Doesn't our experience tell us that oftentimes when people are doing their own thing, that they're almost like asteroids colliding, constantly fighting against each other, banging up against each other, lamenting the fact that somebody else is getting in the way of what they think things should be and what they want, finding ways to manipulate other people so that they can get what they want. That sounds more like the world, doesn't it? Now I want you to imagine those asteroids floating around in space, going every which way, sometimes colliding against each other, sometimes going away from each other, but just floating about. Now let's imagine that these asteroids floating around in space suddenly find themselves in the midst of the great sun, and its gravitational pull begins to work on them. And now it changes their direction, doesn't it? They begin to fall closer and closer to the sun. And as they draw closer to the sun and fall into its orbit, they begin to run parallel to each other, grow closer to one another. You see, if we want to be at peace, and if we want to be good, we first must recognize that goodness is something beyond ourselves. That it's a thing that draws us forth, a thing that beckons us and calls us. And the more we give ourselves over to the one who calls us, we find that we start to fall in harmony with one another in return. And this is why Jesus says that the first commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And that the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus says, I am the vine. You are the branches. Those who live in me will bear great fruit. In other words, if you want to find life, lose yourself. If you want to find peace, Lay down your arms. You want to be good. Follow God and not just yourself. If you look at the world, so many people try to build themselves up. And we as Christian people say that man is never so tall as when he's on his knees. When we turn to God and we bow before him, we are exalted and lifted up. And you see, if you give yourself to the one who has defeated even sin and death itself, what are you afraid of? That's how Jesus can say, how are you amazed? Why are you amazed? Isn't it so obvious? And it is the moment you give yourself to him. And you begin to feel that gravitational pull pulling you together, and things start to come together. They begin to come alive again. But it only makes sense, and you can only see it when you finally turn toward the Son. And you begin to feel his pull. Sisters and brothers, we are a strange people. And I think oftentimes we get frustrated with the fact that so many of our neighbors and our friends, indeed even our children and grandchildren, do not seem to understand our faith. And I think it's because maybe sometimes we forget just how radical this is. That we have to lose ourselves to find ourselves. That we have to humble ourselves to be exalted. But sisters and brothers, you cannot deny the results. That the more we give ourselves to him, the more we find ourselves lifted up. The results cannot be denied. So let us continue to give God thanks for this Easter time and pray that we be transformed so that others may find the light as well. That they may find that perfect joy.